A 6-month-old baby, her tiny body paralyzed and trapped in a stillness most of us could never imagine. The world around her continues to spin, but her body stays frozen in silence. Every day was a struggle for her family, watching her in pain, praying for a miracle. But then came an unexpected hero, no bigger than a pillow with a heart as big as the sky. The bond that grew between a baby and a puppy became a lifeline, something they never thought possible. This is the story of a miracle, the miracle that proved that love knows no boundaries, no matter the size, no matter the strength. A puppy's unwavering loyalty changed everything, and what it did next will leave you in awe. The quiet hum of the house was broken only by the soft, rhythmic sound of breathing. The kind of breath you expect from someone deep in sleep, the kind of breath that signifies peace, rest, and comfort. But for Sarah, every breath felt like a reminder of the stillness that had come to define her baby girl's life. 6 months ago they had been a normal family, full of laughter, joy, and the kind of promise that comes with new beginnings. Little Lily had been a beacon of hope in their lives, bringing warmth with her innocent smiles and tiny hands that wrapped themselves around their parents' fingers. But that all changed in an instant. An accident, a sudden fall, a rushed hospital visit, and a series of heartbreaking tests that no parent should ever have to hear. The doctors had been kind but firm in their words, explaining that Lily had sustained significant spinal cord damage. The chances of her ever walking again were slim, they said. The diagnosis was clear: paralysis. Lily's tiny body remained frozen, her eyes wide open in a vacant stare, her legs and arms motionless. The initial shock of it had paralyzed Sarah and her husband, Ben, in ways they could never have imagined. How could something so tragic happen to someone so small? To someone they loved so dearly? In the following weeks, their world was a blur of hospital visits, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. There was nothing the doctors could do. They offered their best efforts, but deep down, Sarah and Ben knew that the recovery they longed for might never come. And yet, they refused to let go of hope. Sarah, in particular, clung to the belief that miracles happened, even in the darkest of times. Every night, she would hold Lily close to her chest, pressing her little girl against her as if trying to impart some of her own strength. She whispered words of comfort, prayers of hope, desperate for a change. "Please, Lily," she would say, her voice trembling, "please just show us a sign. I know you're still in there." Lily never responded, never moved. But Sarah kept praying. She would not give up on the little girl who had stolen her heart the moment she was born. Her tiny hands that once grasped at everything, reaching for life with such enthusiasm, now rested limply at her sides. Lily's soft, delicate features were frozen in an expression that seemed so unnatural. The life in her had been extinguished, but Sarah wasn't ready to let go. Every morning was a new battle. Ben would carry Lily downstairs to the living room, where they would set her on the couch, surrounded by pillows for support. He would sit with her, his own heart heavy with grief, wishing he could do something, anything, to bring his daughter back. There was an ache deep in his chest, a constant reminder that things might never return to the way they once were. And yet they tried to hold on. They kept up the routine of therapy, hoping that someday, Lily might show some signs of progress. They took her to specialists, they researched alternative treatments, they tried everything the doctors suggested, and yet nothing worked. Every night, Sarah would sit beside her daughter's crib, rubbing her small hands, gently singing lullabies, and hoping that somehow, something would change. The silence between them was oppressive, deafening. One evening, after another disappointing appointment, Sarah found herself sitting in the quiet of their bedroom, clutching the stuffed bear Lily had once loved so much. She couldn't bring herself to put it away. It was the only part of the old Lily that still remained, the one who smiled at the sound of music, the one who would giggle when Sarah made funny faces at her. Now that laugh was a distant memory. Ben entered the room quietly, not wanting to disturb her. He watched his wife for a moment, then placed a hand on her shoulder. His voice was gentle, but Sarah could hear the weight of his words. Maybe we should try to let go a little. Maybe it's time to face reality." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes red from the hours of tears she'd silently shed. "Let go?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you let go of your child? How do you let go of the hope that she'll come back to us? Ben sat beside her, rubbing his hand across her back. I'm not asking you to forget her. But we can't keep living like this, Sarah. She needs something more than what we're giving her. She needs a change. A reason to fight. I think we both do. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to push away the ache in her chest. She didn't know how to explain it, but she knew deep down that Ben was right. Something had to give. There had to be a way out of this dark tunnel they were living in. I can't let go, Ben, she said, her voice breaking. Not yet. I know there's something inside her. I know she's still there. She's just waiting for the right moment to come back to us. Ben didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over and took Sarah's hand, his grip tight, as if trying to offer her strength she didn't feel she had left. I understand. We'll keep hoping, Sarah. We'll keep hoping together. But maybe we should think about other ways to help her, to help ourselves. It was then that Sarah realized, she had been so focused on the possibility of a miracle, she had forgotten to consider what might bring Lily back to life in a different way. She hadn't noticed how her own strength was being drained, or how Ben's quiet suffering was slowly beginning to wear him down. Days blurred into each other. The same routine, the same despair, but still, Sarah refused to give up. She spent countless hours on the phone with specialists, looking into new treatments and pushing her limits in search of something that could save her daughter. Nothing felt right, though. Nothing felt like the answer they so desperately needed. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in the living room, her thoughts a swirl of exhaustion, Ben returned from an errand. He entered the house with a look of determination on his face, holding something small and wrapped in his arms. What is it? Sarah asked, her voice tinged with curiosity but still thick with fatigue. Ben smiled softly, almost as if he were sharing a secret. I've got a surprise for you. He unwrapped the bundle to reveal a tiny, wriggling golden retriever puppy. Its big brown eyes stared up at Sarah with such innocence and curiosity, and its small tail wagged excitedly as it was gently placed on the floor. This is Max, Ben said, a glimmer of hope in his voice. I think he might be able to help. Sarah looked down at the puppy, unsure of what to think. It was a gesture of kindness, she knew that. But would a puppy really help their situation? Could something so small bring the change they needed? Still, she couldn't deny the warmth that began to blossom in her heart as Max's soft eyes met hers. Max's presence was calming. Over the next few days, the little puppy became a comforting presence in their home. He would snuggle beside Lily on the couch during her therapy sessions, his tiny body curling up next to her as if offering warmth and companionship. Sarah watched in amazement. Lily, who had been so still and silent, began to respond. She didn't move yet, not fully, but there was a soft glimmer in her eyes whenever Max came near. She would look at him, her lips twitching as if trying to smile, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the change they needed. Maybe it wasn't about the therapies or the specialists, or the endless hours of worry. Maybe it was the connection between a baby and a puppy, a pure, simple love that couldn't be defined by medical terms. Sarah held her daughter close that night, the warmth of Max still lingering in the room. Please, Lily, she whispered, just give us a sign. Please. As she spoke those words, something inside Sarah began to shift. Maybe the miracle they had been waiting for had already begun. The sun had begun to dip low in the sky, casting a soft golden glow through the windows. The house, typically filled with the quiet hum of everyday life, felt somehow heavier these days. The stillness that lingered was a constant reminder of what was missing. The laughter of a child who had once been full of energy, the joy of watching her explore the world, take her first steps, and make those innocent sounds that melted a parent's heart. But now the house felt silent. Too silent. It was during this quiet time of the afternoon that Sarah heard the familiar sound of the front door opening. She had grown used to Ben's return at this hour, but today there was something different in the air. He was carrying something. A small bundle wrapped in his arms. What's that? Sarah asked, a trace of exhaustion in her voice as she glanced up from the chair where she had been sitting beside Lily, gently stroking her daughter's hand. Ben walked into the room with a soft smile, his face showing a quiet anticipation. I have a surprise for you, he said gently, his eyes lighting up with a mixture of excitement and hope. He carefully unwrapped his arms to reveal a tiny golden retriever puppy, no bigger than a loaf of bread. Its fur was a warm shade of golden brown, and its big soulful eyes seemed to gleam with curiosity and innocence. The puppy yipped softly and wiggled in Ben's hands, eager to explore its new surroundings. "Meet Max," Ben continued, lowering the puppy to the floor where it stood hesitantly for a moment, as if trying to understand its new surroundings. Sarah stared at the puppy for a moment, unsure of what to think. The air in the room felt thick with emotions she wasn't ready to confront. How could something so small, so innocent, bring any change to a situation so dire? Her heart had been shattered in ways she couldn't explain, and the idea of caring for yet another living being, especially one so dependent on her, felt overwhelming. The thought of a puppy, playful and full of energy, felt almost out of place in their world of silence and sorrow. "I don't know, Ben. I mean, it's a lot to take on right now. With everything going on, I'm not sure we have the energy for another responsibility," she said softly, her voice tinged with hesitation. But Ben could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the quiet ache she tried so hard to mask. He knew her well enough to understand that this was more than just a reluctance to take on a new responsibility. It was fear. Fear of change. Fear of opening their hearts to something, or someone, that might bring more pain. "Let's just give it a chance," Ben suggested gently, his voice soothing. "We don't have to rush into anything. But maybe Max can help in ways we don't even know yet. I thought, maybe the presence of a puppy could be what we all need. A little light in the darkness." Sarah looked at the puppy again, her heart softening slightly at the sight of its innocent face. Max was looking at her now, his big brown eyes focused on hers with an almost human-like curiosity, as if he understood more than he was letting on. "All right," Sarah said after a long pause, her lips curling into a small, reluctant smile. "We'll give it a try. But only because you're right, we need something, anything, to help us through this." Ben nodded, relief washing over his face. He set the puppy down carefully on the floor beside Sarah, and Max immediately toddled over to Lily's crib, his tiny paws clicking softly against the hardwood floors. The baby, who had been lying still for hours, blinked at the sudden movement in the room. For a moment, there was only silence, an awkward stillness as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Max circled the crib once, and then, with an almost deliberate slowness, he snuggled down next to Lily's side. He wasn't trying to play. He wasn't jumping around. He just lay there, his body pressed gently against hers, as though offering comfort in his own way. It was a moment of quiet serenity, a strange kind of peace that hung in the air. "Look at him," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "He's so calm. Like he knows." Ben knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe he does," he said softly. Max stayed by Lily's side, his little body nestled close to her, his warmth a comforting presence in the room. There was something so pure about his devotion to the baby, something Sarah couldn't quite explain. It wasn't as if Lily was reacting, she wasn't moving, not in any way that could be seen as significant. But there was a feeling in the room, a subtle shift in the energy. It was as though Max's presence had brought something new, something hopeful, into their home. The days that followed were a blur, but they felt different somehow. Max, though still a puppy with all the unpredictability and joy that came with it, quickly became a constant presence in their home. He was gentle, always careful around Lily, never jumping or barking loudly. Instead, he would lay next to her, offering her his quiet company. Whenever Sarah felt herself sinking into the quiet despair of their situation, Max's little whimpers and excited tail wags would pull her back, even if just for a moment. One evening, as Sarah sat beside Lily's crib, she couldn't help but notice how much more alive the room felt with Max around. He had become something more than a puppy. He was a companion, a symbol of hope. And while Lily still hadn't moved, still hadn't shown any signs of progress, Sarah couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, this little creature had something to offer that was more than just comfort. There was something in the way Max would look at Lily, his large eyes never leaving her, as though watching over her with a silent promise to never leave her side. It was as if he understood the unspoken bond that was slowly beginning to form between them, a bond that was more than just a baby and a puppy. It was a connection forged through shared silence, through shared pain, through an unbreakable devotion. And then one afternoon something changed. Lily had been lying in her crib as she did every day, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Max was once again curled up next to her, his head resting gently on the edge of her pillow. Sarah watched from a distance, her heart heavy with the weight of the past few months, when suddenly the unthinkable happened. Lily's small hand twitched. It was barely noticeable, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Enough to make Sarah gasp in surprise. Max, who had been watching the baby closely, responded immediately. His tail wagged frantically as he licked her hand gently, as if encouraging her. Lily's fingers trembled slightly, then twitched again. And that was when Sarah realized the miracle was beginning. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sudden burst of movement. It wasn't a sign of full recovery. But it was a beginning, a tiny, fragile spark of life that seemed to come from the most unexpected of places, a puppy's unconditional love. As Sarah looked down at Lily and Max, she realized something profound. Max wasn't just a distraction. He wasn't just a puppy that kept them company. He was a catalyst, a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, sometimes the smallest gestures of love could spark the greatest of miracles. And for the first time in months, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The days seemed to stretch out, one flowing into the other, the rhythm of life now slower, quieter than it had ever been. But amidst the stillness there was something new, something gentle yet profound, unfolding in the most unexpected of places. Max, the little golden retriever puppy, had woven his way into the fabric of their lives in a way no one could have predicted. At first, it had been a cautious experiment, a hopeful gesture from Ben to bring some life back into their heavy hearts. But now Max was no longer just a small ball of fur in their home. He had become an unspoken part of their family. His presence, though small, was a balm to the weariness that had consumed Sarah and Ben since Lily's accident. During the day, while Sarah busied herself with the endless routine of caring for her daughter, changing her, feeding her, administering the therapies prescribed by doctors, Max would be by Lily's side. He wasn't a nuisance. He wasn't demanding attention or trying to be the center of focus. Instead, he simply was quiet, comforting, and ever-present. It was during nap time that the bond between them truly began to form. Sarah would gently lay Lily in her crib, making sure her daughter was comfortable, and then she would settle beside the crib with a book or simply sit in silence. Max, however, would not leave Lily's side. He would wait until Sarah was settled, and then with a soft whine, he would carefully climb up into the crib, curling his small body up next to Lily's. At first, Sarah had worried that the puppy's movements might disturb Lily, but Max always seemed to know exactly how to be still, how to make himself a comforting presence without overwhelming her. He would lay down beside her, his head resting just below her outstretched hand, his warm body providing a kind of quiet solace. And it was in these moments of stillness, these quiet afternoons, that Sarah began to notice something changing in her daughter. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss. But then one afternoon, as Sarah watched from the side of the room, she saw Lily's hand twitch. It wasn't much, just a slight, almost imperceptible movement. Her fingers, once stiff and lifeless, were beginning to show signs of life. The first time it happened, Sarah thought she had imagined it. Lily had been resting, her eyelids fluttering in the depths of sleep, and Max had been resting right beside her, his tiny body radiating warmth. It was then that Sarah saw the faintest movement, a tremor in Lily's hand. She reached out, slowly as if testing something, and her fingers brushed against Max's soft fur. Her heart skipped a beat. Lily's hand trembled again, but this time it didn't pull away. Instead, the baby's small fingers curled ever so slightly, as if seeking comfort in Max's presence. Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. It was a tiny movement, nothing grand, nothing that could be deemed a breakthrough, but to Sarah it was everything. It was a sign. A glimmer of hope, a soft light in the darkness that had swallowed their lives for so long. Max, as if sensing the shift, gave a soft whine and nudged his nose into Lily's hand, encouraging her to touch him. The baby's fingers, trembling at first, began to respond more eagerly, pressing into Max's warm coat as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For a brief moment, the room was filled with a sense of magic, as if everything was in its right place. As the days went on, the movements became more frequent. Lily's once lifeless fingers would reach out, seeking the comforting warmth of Max's fur. Sometimes she would smile, a tiny, unspoken gesture that melted Sarah's heart. It was as if Lily was slowly awakening from a long, deep sleep, and Max was the key that had unlocked her. It wasn't just the physical interaction that changed. It was as though the puppy had stirred something deeper within Lily, a spark of life that had been buried beneath the surface for so long. Sarah could see it in the way Lily's eyes would follow Max's movements, her gaze no longer vacant, but filled with curiosity. She would watch as Max playfully pawed at a toy or curled into a ball beside her, her tiny lips parting as though trying to laugh. But it wasn't just Lily who was changing. Max's presence was transforming Sarah too. There was something undeniably healing in the way the puppy had come into their lives, and it wasn't just because of his quiet companionship. It was because he had given them something they hadn't known they needed, a reason to hope again. Every day, as Sarah watched her daughter reach for Max, as she saw the tiny signs of progress, a weight lifted from her chest. The dark cloud that had hung over their family began to lift just a little. Every time Lily's fingers twitched in response to Max's presence, Sarah allowed herself a little more hope, a little more belief that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. But even more than that, Sarah began to understand the depth of the bond that was growing between her daughter and the puppy. There was something so pure, so innocent, about the way Max instinctively knew how to be a source of comfort, of calm, in a world that had been so full of fear and pain. He wasn't just a pet. He was a lifeline. And it wasn't only during nap time that Max stayed close to Lily. As the days passed, he would be by her side at all hours. In the morning, he would sit beside her while Sarah fed her, nudging her hand gently as if to say, "I'm here." In the evening, after therapy sessions and long hours of care, Max would curl up at Lily's feet, his small body acting as a quiet anchor to the world that still felt so uncertain. It was in these quiet moments, as Sarah watched the bond between Lily and Max grow stronger, that she began to believe in something she hadn't allowed herself to believe for months, that recovery, though slow and uncertain, was possible. The doctors had given them no guarantees. They had spoken in terms of limitations, of the damage that could not be undone. But as Sarah watched Lily's hand move ever so slightly, as she saw the baby's eyes brighten at the sight of Max's face, she realized that the impossible was never truly impossible. The puppy, with his gentle devotion, had brought a spark of life to Lily's fragile body, a spark that had been hidden beneath months of sorrow and silence. And as the bond between the baby and the puppy continued to grow, so did Sarah's hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were witnessing a miracle. The evening sky stretched across the horizon, painting the world in soft hues of pink and orange as the sun began to dip below the trees. The cool air that filtered in through the open window carried with it the promise of the night. It was one of those quiet moments when the world seemed to slow down, when time itself appeared to take a breath. Inside, the house was still, save for the faint sound of Sarah humming a lullaby as she sat beside Lily's crib. The room was bathed in the soft light of the setting sun, casting long shadows across the floor. Max, as usual, was close by. His little body sprawled next to Lily, his head resting gently on her pillow, his tail wagging lazily. He was a calm presence in the midst of the chaos that had once consumed their lives. Sarah's eyes were heavy, the weight of each passing day pulling at her, but tonight felt different. Something in the air had shifted. The soft murmurs of Max's whines, the quiet rhythm of Lily's shallow breath, it felt like a moment of peace. Sarah watched as the puppy shifted beside the baby, nudging her arm with his nose as if checking on her. Max had done this countless times before, but tonight, there was a tenderness in the air, a quiet anticipation. Then, just as the last traces of sunlight disappeared and the first stars began to appear outside, it happened. Lily's foot twitched. It was subtle at first, so faint that Sarah wasn't sure she had seen it. Her heart stopped for a second, the silence of the room enveloping her. She leaned closer, her breath caught in her chest, watching with bated breath. And then it happened again, this time a little more pronounced. Lily's foot moved ever so slightly, the small muscles in her legs stirring, a faint movement that had been absent for so long. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch Lily's tiny foot. And then, like a miracle unfolding before her eyes, Lily's legs began to twitch, just a little, but enough for Sarah to know that something extraordinary was happening. Her legs, which had been motionless for months, began to stir, each tiny movement a testament to the fight within her. It wasn't a dramatic burst of activity, but it didn't need to be. It was enough. It was everything. The muscles in her legs, weak and unused, began to move in small, hesitant motions. It wasn't the first step Sarah had dreamed of. It wasn't the recovery she had prayed for. But it was a sign, a spark of hope that had lain dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Ben, who had been standing by the window, turned toward the crib at the sound of Sarah's quiet gasp. His eyes widened in disbelief as he saw the small but undeniable movement of their daughter's legs. "Sarah?" Ben's voice was barely a whisper, his eyes locked on Lily, his breath catching in his throat. Is she really?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. She reached out, gently taking Lily's hand, her heart racing. The baby's legs twitched again, this time with a little more strength. It was as though the very act of moving had awakened something inside of her, a flicker of life that had been trapped within her fragile body. Max, who had been lying beside the crib, watching the scene unfold, jumped up excitedly. His tail wagged furiously, his tiny body trembling with joy as if he knew something remarkable was happening. He gently nudged Lily's hand, offering her his warmth and comfort, his small body vibrating with enthusiasm. It was as though he too was cheering her on, urging her to keep going. Max's touch, his presence, had always been a quiet source of solace for the family. But now it seemed to have a deeper significance. The puppy, who had become an integral part of their lives, was more than just a companion. He was a catalyst. He was the spark that had ignited this moment of hope. Sarah watched in awe as Lily's legs began to move again, this time more steadily. They weren't yet the strong, purposeful movements that she had once imagined, but they were a start. A beginning. It was more than they had ever expected, more than they had dared to hope for. Ben knelt beside Sarah, placing a hand on her shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "This is it, Sarah. This is the turning point. She's coming back to us." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she looked down at Lily, her precious baby, whose body had once been so still, now showing signs of life. The quiet, uncertain road that had stretched out before them, filled with doctors' visits and endless worries, was now being replaced with something new, something full of possibility. Max, sensing the significance of the moment, stood up again, his small tail wagging like a whirlwind. He carefully licked Lily's hand, offering his comfort and support as if saying, "You're not alone." And in that moment, Sarah understood something deeper. Max was more than just a puppy. He was a part of the miracle that had begun to unfold. The sun had fully set, leaving the room bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight, but the warmth that filled the room was unlike anything Sarah had felt in months. It wasn't just the warmth of the room, it was the warmth of hope, of possibility, of a future that had once seemed out of reach. For the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to believe. The miracle was no longer just a dream, it was real. And it had come in the form of a tiny puppy, who had unknowingly become the hero of their story. As the hours passed, Lily's movements remained slow and gentle, but they were real. Each twitch, each small kick was a step closer to recovery. It wasn't the end of their journey, but it was a beginning that had been made possible by love, faith, and the unspoken bond between a little girl and her puppy. The days that followed were like a blur, too fast, too overwhelming to fully comprehend. What once seemed impossible, what doctors had feared would never come to pass, was happening right before their eyes. Lily, their little girl who had been paralyzed, who had been trapped in a body that refused to move, was slowly but steadily regaining control of her muscles. At first it was the smallest of victories. Her fingers, once rigid and unresponsive, now flexed with increasing strength. Her hands, which had once been still, began to explore the world around her, brushing against the soft fur of Max, who lay faithfully by her side. Her eyes, once dull and lifeless, were now bright with curiosity and wonder, watching every movement Max made as if learning from him, as if his gentle presence was the guide she needed to find her way back to the world. Sarah and Ben could hardly believe it. They had been prepared for a long, uncertain road, a future filled with treatments and therapies, one step forward and two steps back. But now every day felt like a blessing. Every new movement, no matter how small, was a triumph. And they knew, deep in their hearts, that it was Max who had been the catalyst for it all. The doctors too were in awe. They had seen progress before, but never like this. Never had they witnessed such a rapid recovery from a child who had once been diagnosed as paralyzed. Their medical explanations were a tangle of terms, filled with disbelief. But they had no choice but to acknowledge what was happening. Something miraculous was unfolding right in front of them. And through it all, Max never left Lily's side. In the early days of her recovery, when Lily's body still trembled with weakness, Max was there. He would lie next to her crib at night, his soft, rhythmic breathing the only sound in the room as he kept vigil. During the day he would nudge Lily's hand as if to say, "You can do this," his eyes filled with an understanding that no human could quite explain. And every time Lily's hand twitched, every time she reached out, Max was there, offering his quiet encouragement. Max was a constant. In a world that had once been filled with uncertainty, his presence was a reminder that some things, like love and devotion, never wavered. Then came the day when Lily, who had once been unable to even roll over on her own, managed to shift her weight and turn onto her stomach. Sarah watched in disbelief as her daughter, with a small grunt of effort, lifted her head and looked around the room, her eyes wide with wonder. It was the first time she had seen Lily do that in months. "Ben, look," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. She turned over on her own. Ben hurried into the room, his eyes filled with shock and joy. He knelt beside the crib, his hands trembling as he reached out to gently touch Lily's tiny shoulder. "My God, this is amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. And Max, always the silent observer, stood beside them, his tail wagging, his eyes filled with pride. From that moment on, the changes came faster. Lily's body, once stiff and unresponsive, began to show the signs of recovery they had longed for. Her legs, which had been paralyzed, started to twitch, then to move, slowly at first but with increasing confidence. Her hands, once frozen, now grasped toys, her fingers curling around objects with a strength that surprised them all. It wasn't the miraculous recovery the doctors had hoped for, but it was a beginning that no one could have predicted. Max was there for each step, for each victory. He watched over Lily with unwavering loyalty, a silent protector who guided her in ways no one else could. It was as if the bond between them was a quiet promise. "I will never leave you." Months passed, and the once helpless baby who had been unable to move was now crawling, moving with purpose, exploring the world around her. Sarah and Ben would watch, their hearts swelling with pride as Lily would crawl toward Max, her tiny hands reaching out for him as if she knew he was the one who had brought her back. It wasn't long before Lily began to pull herself up. First it was the coffee table, then the couch. Slowly, steadily she was learning to stand. And Max, true to form, was always by her side. He would sit beside her, his tail wagging in encouragement, his eyes never leaving her. Whenever Lily faltered, whenever her legs wobbled with uncertainty, Max would nudge her gently as if to say, "You're doing great. Keep going." And then, the moment they had all been waiting for, the moment Sarah and Ben had dared to dream of, but had never quite allowed themselves to fully believe would come, arrived. Lily stood, steady on her legs, her body holding strong as she took her first wobbly steps toward Max. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if time itself paused to witness this moment. Lily took one tentative step, then another. And then, with a burst of determination, she took a third. And finally she reached Max. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, her chest heaving with emotion as she watched her daughter, her precious baby, take those first steps. Ben's eyes filled with tears as he stood, watching in awe, unable to speak, unable to contain the overwhelming surge of love and pride he felt. Max, ever the loyal companion, stood proudly by Lily's side, his tail wagging with unrestrained joy. He gave a soft bark as if cheering her on, and gently licked her face in a gesture of love and support. It wasn't just the first steps of a baby. It was the first steps of a miracle. A baby, once paralyzed, now walking toward a future that was wide open with possibilities. And it was all because of the love and devotion of a tiny puppy who had never given up on her. Sarah and Ben embraced, tears flowing freely down their cheeks. The miracle they had once only dared to dream of was now unfolding before them, real and undeniable. They had watched their daughter struggle, they had witnessed her pain, but they had also witnessed the quiet, steadfast love that had made all the difference. Lily's journey wasn't over, there were still challenges ahead, still obstacles to overcome, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah and Ben felt certain of one thing: their little girl was going to be okay. And they owed it all to Max. The miracle had unfolded. And it was only just beginning.